In the fall of 2003, a nurse named Amy Loughren sat in her car outside a diner in New Jersey, wearing a wire for the police, about to have coffee with a man she considered one of her closest friends. His name was Charles Cullen. He had helped her through panic attacks and late-night shifts. He had once driven across the state just to check on her kids. He was also, investigators now believed, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And here is the part that should unsettle you most. By the time detectives finally closed in on him, at least 6 different hospitals had already suspected him of killing patients. None of them called the police. They just let him leave and let him find another hospital and another set of patients who had no idea what was walking into their room. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to where it started. Charles Cullen was born in 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey, the youngest of 8 children. His father died when he was an infant, and his mother, the anchor of the family, died when Cullen was 17. On the same day he graduated high school, he enlisted in the Navy, served on a nuclear submarine, and by his own account, struggled badly during those years. He attempted suicide more than once while in the service. He was eventually discharged, and in 1984 he enrolled in nursing school. 3 years later, in June of 1987, he took his first nursing job in the burn unit at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. On paper, he was exactly what hospitals wanted: quiet, competent, willing to take the shifts nobody else wanted, especially nights. In practice, he had just been handed access to the one thing that made his crimes possible: medication, and the freedom to administer it with almost no one watching. It did not take long. Within roughly a year of starting at St. Barnabas, Cullen is believed to have committed his first murder, a patient named John Yengo S.R., a retired judge who died after receiving medication Cullen was never authorized to give him. Over the next several years at St. Barnabas, patients kept dying in ways that puzzled staff. Unexplained crashes, insulin and heart medication showing up in patients who had no medical reason to be given them. Nurses noticed. Some raised concerns internally. Nothing escalated. Cullen stayed at St. Barnabas for roughly a decade, moving through different units, before eventually leaving under circumstances that were quiet rather than public. That pattern, a hospital growing uneasy, then letting the problem simply walk out the door, would repeat itself for the next 16 years, at hospital after hospital, almost like a script everyone had agreed to follow without ever writing it down. Cullen's personal life during these years was, by every account, unraveling. He married in 1987, the same year he entered nursing, and the marriage collapsed into a bitter divorce by the mid-1990s, with his ex-wife alleging in court filings that he had exhibited disturbing, erratic behavior around their children. Around the same period, he was arrested for breaking into a colleague's home and was investigated for stalking a nurse he had grown obsessed with. None of this on its own proves motive. Investigators and forensic psychiatrists who later evaluated Cullen never landed on a single, satisfying explanation for why he killed. He was not extracting money from his victims. He was not sexually assaulting them. Some who studied him pointed to a compulsion tied to control, a need to decide who lived and who died in an environment where he otherwise had very little power over his own chaotic life. Cullen himself, when asked directly, gave answers that shifted depending on the interview, at times claiming he was ending suffering, at other times unable to explain his reasoning at all. What is not ambiguous is the arithmetic. The more hospitals let him quietly walk away, the more opportunities he was given to test whether anyone was truly watching. And again, the answer was no. His method rarely changed. Cullen favored drugs that were common on a hospital floor and easy to justify in small doses. digoxin, a heart medication that can be lethal in overdose, and insulin, which can silently and catastrophically crash a patient's blood sugar. Both drugs mimic conditions that critically ill patients already have. A patient on a cardiac floor going into arrhythmia does not automatically raise alarms. A patient with unstable blood sugar levels does not automatically raise alarms either. That was the horrifying elegance of it. Cullen was not hiding bodies. He was hiding murders inside the normal, expected chaos of a hospital where people already die every day, and where a death that looks tragic but plausible rarely gets a second look. After St. Barnabas, Cullen moved to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. It was there, in 1993, that colleagues found bags of intravenous fluid that had been tampered with, spiked with insulin, hidden in a used Sharps container rather than a trash bin, which suggested someone was trying to prepare doses without anyone noticing. The hospital investigated internally. They could not conclusively tie it to Cullen, or chose not to pursue it far enough to prove it, and no formal report went to police or to the state nursing board. Cullen left Warren Hospital not long after. He would go on to work at, or move through, 9 more institutions across New Jersey and Pennsylvania over the following decade, including Hunterdon Medical Center, St. Luke's Hospital, Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, Lehigh Valley Hospital, Sacred Heart Hospital, Easton Hospital, Morristown Memorial Hospital, and eventually Somerset Medical Center. At Morristown Memorial, where Cullen worked in the intensive care unit in the late 1990s, colleagues later recalled a stretch of patient deaths that felt statistically out of step with what the unit normally saw. And at least one nurse, there raised concerns to a supervisor about Cullen's pattern of volunteering to care for patients who were not assigned to him. At Hunterdon Medical Center, Cullen was let go after only a matter of months, following what hospital administrators internally described as troubling judgment and unexplained medication discrepancies. Though again, no report reached the State Board of Nursing or the police. At several of these institutions, the same troubling shape kept appearing: a cluster of unexpected deaths, medication records that did not add up, colleagues who felt something was deeply wrong, and administrators who ultimately did not act on it in any way that mattered. Later investigators, piecing together his full employment history after his arrest, found that Cullen's resignation letters and termination records, read side by side across all 9 institutions, told an obvious story. No single hospital was reading them side by side. Each one only had its own page. Here is where the story stops being about one man and starts being about an entire system. Because the honest, uncomfortable truth is that Charles Cullen was not some criminal mastermind slipping past brilliant security. He was, by several accounts, sloppy. He got caught accessing medications for patients who were not his. He got caught with unexplained gaps in his employment history. He was investigated by police on at least 4 separate occasions before 2003, arising from complaints at different hospitals. And none of those investigations resulted in charges, in large part because the hospitals that held the evidence did not fully cooperate or did not hand over the information that would have connected the dots. Cullen was fired or quietly pressured to resign by at least 5 different hospitals over the course of his career. Almost every single time, the separation agreement was structured to avoid conflict. No public accusation, no call to the state board, sometimes not even a negative reference, because a negative reference could invite a lawsuit from a nurse who had not, technically, been convicted of anything. This is the part worth sitting with, because it is the actual mechanism that let a man kill for 16 years. Hospitals are, among other things, businesses with legal exposure. If an institution formally accuses a staff member of killing patients and cannot prove it in court, that hospital opens itself to a defamation lawsuit, to devastating publicity, to malpractice liability stretching back years. It is often organizationally simpler and financially safer to simply let a suspicious employee resign quietly and move on. The hospital's immediate problem disappears. Nobody has to testify. Nobody has to admit that a killer worked their floors for months or years. The catastrophic catch, is that the problem does not disappear. It just becomes the next hospital's problem and the one after that, and the patients in between pay for it with their lives. Cullen himself would later say chillingly that hospitals firing him without reporting him essentially told him he could keep going. Nobody ever stopped him. They just relocated him. Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey, was different in one crucial way. Unlike most of Cullen's previous workplaces, Somerset used a computerized medication dispensing system called PICSYS. Every time a nurse wanted to pull a drug from the machine, they had to log in with their own identification and request that specific medication for a specific patient. It created a digital paper trail that older, more manual systems simply did not generate. Cullen worked at Somerset starting in 2002, and it was here, in the summer of 2003, that a pattern began emerging that was harder to explain away than anything before it. A Catholic priest named Reverend Florian Gall was admitted to Somerset for pancreatitis in June of 2003. He was recovering, stable, expected to go home. Then his blood sugar crashed without explanation, and he died. Around the same time, hospital pharmacists began noticing something odd in the PICSYS records. Requests for digoxin and insulin tied to patients who had no medical order for either drug. The hospital's own pharmacy staff flagged the anomaly internally and eventually reported it to the New Jersey Department of Health, which in turn brought in law enforcement. Even then, Somerset reportedly sat on the information for months, running its own internal review before detectives were fully looped in. Precious time during which more patients were exposed to Cullen's continued access. The investigation was led by two detectives, Tim Braun and Danny Baldwin, who quickly ran into the same wall every prior investigator had hit. A hospital reluctant to hand over complete records, worried about liability, worried about the story getting out. Somerset's own lawyers reportedly slowed the detectives down at nearly every step, citing patient privacy laws and internal review procedures. Even as the two men grew increasingly convinced, they were looking at an active killer still working the floor. What broke the case open was not just the paperwork. It was a person. Amy Loughren was a nurse at Somerset who had become genuinely close with Cullen. She had no idea, at first, what detectives suspected. When Braun and Baldwin approached her and laid out the PICSYS records showing Cullen repeatedly pulling drugs for patients who were never prescribed them, alongside a work history riddled with unexplained departures from hospital after hospital, she was horrified and she agreed to help. Loughren met with Cullen, wearing a hidden wire, and steered their conversations toward the details investigators needed, while quietly worried the entire time that he might realize what she was doing. She was also, at the time, dealing with a serious heart condition of her own, which made the irony almost unbearable. A nurse with a failing heart, building the case that would stop a man entrusted with keeping other hearts beating. On December 12, 2003, police arrested Charles Cullen. In the interrogation room, faced with the PICSYS records and the mounting employment history that traced his path across 9 institutions and 16 years, Cullen began to talk. Over the following months, in April and again in July of 2004, he confessed. He told investigators he could not remember all of his victims. He put his own estimate somewhere between 30 and 40 patients, though he also said, almost offhandedly, that the real number could be far higher. That claim has never been verified, and true crime storytelling has a bad habit of running with the biggest possible number because it is more shocking. It is worth being precise here. What is confirmed, what Cullen pleaded guilty to in court, is 29 murders, along with additional counts of attempted murder, across his time in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Some accounts of his broader guilty pleas, factoring in later Pennsylvania proceedings, place the confirmed total closer to the low to mid-30s. The number 400, which shows up in headlines and documentaries, comes entirely from speculation, extrapolated from his 16-year career and access patterns, not from anything Cullen admitted to or any court established. It may be closer to the truth. It may not be. Nobody, including Cullen, actually knows, and that ambiguity is itself part of the horror of the case, because it means the families of dozens of patients who died unexpectedly during his years at these hospitals will likely never get a definitive answer about what really happened to their loved ones. In 2004, Charles Cullen pleaded guilty in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania courts. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences in New Jersey alone, later followed by additional life sentences tied to his Pennsylvania guilty pleas, bringing his total sentencing to multiple consecutive life terms, effectively guaranteeing he will die in prison because he cooperated with prosecutors and provided information that helped confirm additional victims and clear up lingering suspicions at various hospitals. He was spared the death penalty, a decision made in part so families could get answers instead of Cullen taking his remaining secrets to an execution. The courtroom scenes during his plea hearings were, by the accounts of reporters who sat through them, some of the hardest to watch in New Jersey's legal history. Family members of his victims were permitted to speak directly to Cullen before sentencing, describing parents and grandparents who had gone into the hospital for a routine procedure or for recovery after a manageable illness and never come home. Several noted the same detail. They had trusted the hospital completely, precisely because there was no reason not to. Cullen sat largely expressionless through most of these statements. Prosecutors, in exchange for his continued cooperation identifying victims across his 16-year career, agreed not to pursue capital charges, a decision that some families supported, believing it was the only way to extract a full accounting, and others bitterly opposed, believing he deserved nothing less than execution for what he had done. The aftermath of the Cullen case did produce real, lasting change, even if it came far too late for his victims. New Jersey passed legislation, sometimes referred to informally in connection with this case, that closed the exact loophole hospitals had been exploiting for 16 years. Institutions are now required to report suspected patient harm by medical staff to state authorities, rather than being allowed to quietly separate from an employee and let the problem become someone else's responsibility. Healthcare systems more broadly began tightening medication dispensing oversight, expanding the kind of digital tracking that Somerset's PICSYS system had used, precisely because that system, however delayed, was what ultimately produced the evidence that ended Cullen's career. National nursing and hospital accreditation bodies also pushed for clearer standards around reporting credible suspicions of patient harm, rather than treating them purely as internal personnel matters. And hospital associations began publicly discussing the need for better information sharing between institutions, so that a nurse fired for suspicious conduct in one state could not simply walk into a job interview in the next county with a clean-looking resume. The case also became a case study, quite literally, in medical ethics courses and hospital risk management training, precisely because it captured something uncomfortable about how large institutions behave under pressure. It was never a single villain making a single bad call. It was dozens of individually reasonable-sounding decisions, made by people trying to protect their employer from legal exposure, that added up to something monstrous when stacked end to end across 16 years. That is arguably the most important lesson buried in the Cullen case, more important even than the body count. Institutional self-protection, practiced consistently enough, can produce outcomes just as devastating as outright malice, without a single person along the way believing they were doing anything wrong. It would be comforting to end this story by saying the system failed because no one could have known. That is not what happened. People did know, or at least strongly suspected, at multiple hospitals over multiple years. Pharmacists noticed. Nurses noticed. Administrators were told. And the response, again and again, was to make the immediate problem disappear rather than confront what it actually meant. Charles Cullen was a killer, but he was also, for 16 years, a test of whether institutions built to protect vulnerable people would choose accountability over liability when it actually mattered. 6 or more hospitals took that test. Almost all of them failed it. Somewhere in a hospital room, a patient trusted the person adjusting their Roman IV line, the way we all do, the way we have to. That trust is the entire foundation modern medicine is built on. Charles Cullen spent 16 years proving how easily it could be exploited, and how many people, when given the choice between doing the difficult right thing and the easy quiet thing, chose quiet.